Hey everybody, it's Topher. Today I'm going to be doing a walkthrough of me tufting from start to finish of a rug. I'm kind of just going to show you guys the process from start to finish, and right now I'm putting on the tufting material onto my actual station. It's kind of a pain because it takes a little while. The nails on these are really small, and over time it gets a little worn down, so gotta take a staple gun, take up the edges and the empty spaces. You kind of want to make sure you're not leaving any of that material loose in the middle or on any of the sides, really. This sheet was a little more loose than I'd like it to be, and you'll see a little bit later when I actually start the rug tufting that it kind of has a lot of elasticity to it when I'm tufting the material, which is fine. I mean, it is like a sheet essentially, and you want it to be a little bit elastic, but not as much as it ends up being. That's me turning on my my projector, getting the logo on there. So for this logo, I found it online. It's the PlayStation logo. Found it online, but it didn't have that black around the edges. So I went on Photoshop and I just took one of the tools. I forget what it was called, but basically it puts a thickness, like a line, around whatever the object is, and it tries its best to, I'm guessing with like some sort of AI, to figure out the shape. But it did a really good job, and now it has like a nice, black around the edges and on the insides. So if you've been tufting for a while, this is pretty important. You want to make sure that the image that you're tufting onto is backwards, unless you like flip it around and tuft it some other way. If you're new to it, anytime you're doing a rug and you have an image that you want to use, you want to project it onto your canvas backwards, so that when it's actually a finished product, it'll come out reading letters correctly, or it'll look normal. I had that issue a couple times the first couple rugs I made, like with my Animal Crossing leaf. It wasn't too bad, but you can definitely notice it. I'm just tracing out the edges and the outlines. Sometimes it gets a little confusing, especially with more complicated projects. You want to make sure you're actively thinking about, like, okay, well, I put these black lines here for the teal, yellow, or whatever, but there's no actual black lines there. Those are just where the colors change. Sometimes I've been known to mess up things like that before, and that's why you practice. Threaded up the gun. I started there. I don't know if you can tell, but it's pushing in a lot more than it usually should. Like, you want the material to be taut, but you don't want it to be hyper tight and then it's tearing at the nails or anything. But starting off here with the black. Sometimes it depends on how many rugs, I guess you could say, I've done in a week or in a month. Sometimes I like to have my lines close, other times I like to have them a little further. I guess it really depends on the project and the use case. Most times, if it's been a while, I'll just line up and make all the lines really close. Try to hit the angles in a certain way. You can see the rounded edges and the the curves. They're a little bit off at the beginning, but over time, when you're actually filling it in, you have an opportunity to kind of fill in that edge a little more. For example, if you have an edge that's not fully filled in, you don't have to go around it. Like, if you miss and you go a little too, let's say you cut in where the P is, I think I did a little bit, you can actually go right next to it and shoot a little more material, and it kind of pushes it out, so it makes it more round. There's me just putting some yarn back up, spooling. Those are little 3D printed yarn spools that I got off of, I googled it, but there's a website I always go to. Those are definitely good to have. When I made my tufting station, I put my yarn through those little eyelets, and it really helps to keep it all kind of straight and keep it all consistent, I guess you could say. Because if you try to do it where you're just doing the big balls of yarn, and you do like two of them together, for whatever reason, I cannot get them to either stay, I guess, the right amount of tight. Like, maybe they loosen up, or maybe they get too tight on something, they get caught on themselves. So I just like to spool my yarn and have it in these balls that I use, and we'll use those little 3D printed spools and little eyelets to try and get it to come off a little more smoothly, so I don't have to keep messing with the yarn, and I can just focus on making the actual rugs themselves. Filling on the rest of that black there. Now you'll notice later on, I wanted to film every single time I went to spool the yarn just to show how much I have to do it. But there was a couple times where I was just like, you know what, I'd rather just, keep the camera on the actual rug. It looked a little better that way, honestly. But yeah, this is, I want to say this is 850 times speed. So this is over a few hours. I probably did maybe like 6 hours to 8 hours worth of work on this, because there are times where I just take a break and I'm just sitting there like at the very end. Sometimes when I'm finishing up a rug, I'll sit in that chair next to me and my feet will get numb if I'm like crisscross too long on the floor like that, and then I'll sit in the chair and just kind of like chill out for a bit. What I've done is, if I have little spaces like this, sometimes for the outline, as you'll notice, I have 2 lines going on the outlines for like the parts that aren't quite as straight as I'd like them to be. But then when I'm filling in, I'm just doing straight lines, just because a straight line is always going to seem a little cleaner on a finished product. Definitely do that if you can, if you have the patience for it, because it takes a little while to get used to. But it's easier than trying to constantly do like turning, which turning isn't that bad when you're actually turning it and making like a curved object, or like, turning the corner like on the PS shape. But obviously there's some, as you can see, it wasn't perfect at first, but now with all that infill that I did, it should have straightened it out a bit. And of course, when you're done, you can trim it to your liking and, make it look a certain way. And I'm just finishing up. It's really cool to see the spools themselves kind of just get smaller over time. It's pretty neat. I like to be able to, I guess, see the progress. I never really look at it this way. That's me just tilting the actual tufting station to make sure everything looks good, trim if I have to. And then I took my trimmer. I was afraid to do this for my first few rugs, but now I've gotten used to it and I've done it a couple times. Because this stuff, it's not super cheap for the materials. The yarn is pretty cheap. You can always find that on sale. I go to Joann Fabrics, but like the backing and with the size of the type of tufting station I have, I end up wasting a lot of that material, like that overhang on the sheet. So I like to try and use as much space as I can and not waste any. But over time, I've gotten more comfortable with shaving the back, and that actually makes the glue stick a little bit better. You just want to be careful. You don't want to go too deep, because then, pieces of yarn will start pulling themselves out. Oh yeah, and here's where I forgot that I still had the little in-betweens of the PS logo to fill out those black edges. You'll notice a couple different outfit changes. I want to say I changed outfits like 4 or 5 times. This was over a few days on my vacation, so I just wanted to enjoy it and make this rug and have something to show you guys. I think it was pretty neat. I've had this idea for a while, and a buddy of mine was actually asking me, like, if I could make something like this, and I said, man, that's perfect. Like, that's, I've been looking forward to making that for a while. I got a perfect excuse to make it now. And, just making those lines straight. It's really weird watching yourself back, but it's fun. It's good to see myself having fun, if that makes any sense. And then I'm gonna start moving on to the colors. I think this is when I moved the camera after this, I want to say. Yeah, I did. So now you can see the reds going through, and the color, I really like the way, I think I might start shooting it this way, like when I'm filming myself making this. It's actually pretty fun to watch from this side, but as you can tell, the tufting material is definitely pushing out more than it should. I mean, of course, when you're making something like this, it's gonna, you have to push really hard on the gun to make sure it goes through, but it's just, it seems like it's pushing way further than it should. Luckily, this one didn't get messed up by that. And as you can see, there's a little bit of yarn, I guess residue, just a little bit of, I guess, dust buildup or whatever. It's acrylic yarn, so it falls apart while you're like messing with it too much. It's pretty easy to rip it up. I mean, any yarn's pretty easy to rip up, but like it has a little bit of, I guess, dust or whatever it lets off that kind of compiles at the bottom of that wood there. You can see my my attempt at making a clean, I guess you could say a clean edge on that wood when I put this all together. Not really. I know the angles are a little off, but surprisingly, it's held up so far. I've had this tufting station for almost 8 months now, and it hasn't had any issues. Just the tack strips, after a while, they get a little worn, a little annoying. You start to, see some screws go missing. Oh, right there. Yeah, that's what you try to avoid. But one of those yarn balls just came up a little bit. Sometimes when you're making those yarn balls, when you're like using the little tool I use, I guess it's like a spinner type of thing, you don't want to have them too tight because then the yarn catches underneath, it picks up those little spools I have, and then they like fall off, or you know, they get stuck, or you know, on the gun end, what's going to happen is to the tufting gun, I'm gonna see the string pop out, and the next, you know, line I do is just going to be one line, and I have to go over it again, and it becomes really, you know, just annoying over time. I'm sure you guys saw my mouth. I'm just mealing as I'm going. I guess that's my focused face. I never really noticed that before. That's pretty funny. I guess I'm just jamming along to whatever I'm listening to. Yeah, that's the red. Almost done there. I try to make it so I don't waste too much material. Like there's bags on bags behind me where I'm standing right now of just yarn sitting there. And I want to do everything I can not to use too much material when I'm spooling it, because what's left on those yarn balls right there is going to get thrown into like a leftover pile. And I want to be able to use them later for another project, basically. Starting on the yellow, looking pretty good. Yeah, the reason I keep reiterating the tautness of your material is because whether it's too tight or if it's too loose, what happens when you're tufting is you can't really see it, you kind of have to feel it. You kind of feel the tufting gun, it almost feels like it's skipping some spaces where it's, you know, shooting the yarn into. And it, you know, a lot of the times it makes it really hard, especially because I challenge myself and try to do a lot of these rounded, you know, shapes inside of these designs. What happens is a lot of the time when you're hitting those corners, or you're trying to turn the gun to make it a round or a circle shape, whatever, and it's too tight or too loose, it kind of messes up the shape, and you can't really, I mean, you can take the yarn out and go through again, but it just has the same problem where it just keeps, it feels like it's skipping something, and you don't want that. You want to make sure you're doing everything you can to keep it, you know, kind of as tight as possible. Not just the material, but as tight as possible without, you know, tightening until the material rips or anything. One good thing I heard is when you're putting up your tufting sheet, you want to make it taut enough so that you can maybe throw like a coin or a quarter up against it and it'll bounce off. You just want to have a little bit of give. I think I'm just going through, cutting some edges off in the back. I'll get to the ones in the front shortly. I alternate between a pair of scissors that I got, those Japanese scissors I think I had in the last video, and the clippers that I use. Sometimes one's easier than the other. Sometimes when you just have a loose thread, you just want to use the scissors, but other times I really don't feel like turning on the clippers just for one thing, so I'll use those. But if there's a lot, I'll just turn on the clippers or if they're nearby. I've moved on to the blue. Starting to get a good fill in. You don't want to have too much of that material next to each other because it kind of clumps up, and the end result is it feels really thick in some areas and really thin in other areas. Sometimes for big things like the letter P on this one, some of that stuff you don't want to have too much yarn in one spot. You want to kind of have that free flowing a little bit because it was so much red I had to use, but seems like it's going pretty well. And then right around here, I actually lost the footage for the blue, so you'll just get a really quick glimpse at the end there of me just giving a thumbs up, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.